In February of 1964, an 8-year-old kid named Larry resided in the predominantly Jewish Long Island town of North Woodmere, New York. Before that month, though certainly a kid that enjoyed a catchy tune, Larry probably wouldn't have called himself an ardent music fan. In those days, he did have access to a radio, but only 2 stations existed, and they were both AM. His relationship with music all changed one night that month, upon sitting with his family to watch The Ed Sullivan Show. He watched, for the first time, English rock and roll band The Beatles perform. The band's performances of their hit singles, Close Your Eyes and She Loves You, captivated the young boy, whose response to the music he could only describe as euphoric. Those songs formed an emotional connection with him that he had never experienced previously with music. His brother Lenny, who watched with him, enjoyed the British quartet as well, and consequently bought their record Meet the Beatles on vinyl. Larry remembers flipping over that vinyl and hearing the classics, I Saw Her Standing There, and I Want to Hold Your Hand. This band made him listen to the radio more intentionally, and ultimately get his hands on records from other artists, such as the Dave Clark Five, the Bee Gees, the Turtles, and Herman's Hermits. But Beatlemania affected his childhood far beyond the music. Larry recalls seeing a kid on his school bus wearing a wig to mimic the hair of the members of the Beatles. Although seeing men with long hair was unprecedented for him, his strong admiration for the band prompted him to take his own hair resting behind his ears and place it over his ears, to bring his appearance closer to that of his favorite band. To Larry, the Beatles weren't mere humans. They were his heroes, godlike. They were new, fresh, and inspiring. Any time any person said the name John, Paul, George, and Ringo in the same sentence, he knew exactly that the Beatles, the best of the best of the best, were being discussed. In 2023, Larry now lives in the suburbs of Orlando, Florida. Most people know him as Dr. Brenner. His wife calls him Lair, but I, of course, know him as Dad. Growing up, my dad shared with my siblings and I his love for the Beatles, playing their greatest hits during any road trip in which my mother let him control the stereo. Through his stories, the Beatles became godlike to us as well. When I was 8 years old, the music industry had changed to the extent that a band of the magnitude of the Beatles probably could not exist. However, there was one godlike band whose love I had for them resembled the fandom my dad had for the Beatles at that age. One band that everyone in my 3rd grade class discussed. We relished in each hit, each video, and each move. They were the coolest older brothers that represented everything about life we had to look forward to. As my dad had John, Paul, George, and Ringo, we had Mark, Tom, and Travis. I'm Dov Brenner, and this is Hotcakes from a 90s Stan. I want to apologize for the delay in between episodes. Life has a habit of getting in the way of things sometimes. Anyways, today I will be discussing our second forgotten album, the 2011 comeback album, Neighborhoods by Blink-182. On February 9th, 2009, Tom DeLonge, Mark Hoppus, and Travis Barker, whose arm was notably situated in a cast, awkwardly announced to the world at the 51st Annual Grammy Awards that they suspended their hiatus and the pop-punk legends Blink-182 were back. The band spent most of 2009 on their reunion tour and spent most of 2010 separately in the studio. Then on September 27, 2011, Blink-182 released their first album in 8 years, Neighborhoods. Despite peaking higher on the Billboard Hot 200 than their previous record and receiving positive reviews from critics, the album ultimately sold far fewer copies than not only the previous album, but than any album since their debut, Cheshire Cat. So, If critics generally enjoy the album and hype surrounded the record's release due to the anticipation of Blink-182's first post-hiatus effort, it begs the questions of why did it undersell so much, possess such less significance in terms of streaming, avoid the success on the singles charts that the band had previously enjoyed, and, to put it plainly, become a forgotten album. In my humble opinion, to understand the album's lackluster legacy, we have to understand Neighborhood's predecessor, titled Blink-182, but often referred to as Untitled. And to understand that record, we have to harken back to March 14th, 2000, when Blink-182 released a single that kinda came out of nowhere. I say it kinda came out of nowhere due to the endearingly immature lyrics of the band's hit singles up to that point. In Damn It, their 1997 breakout hit, perhaps the most memorable lines occur in the beginning of the second verse with, quote, "The steps that I retrace, the sad look on your face, the timing and structure, did you hear? He fucked her." What's My Age Again, which served as the lead single from Blink-182's crossover album Enema of the State, that name also very silly, provided a clinic on how to appeal to the masses with sophomoric humor and an overall message the youth can get behind. Throughout the song, Hiatus shares humorous stories depicting his presumably fictional immaturity. In the first stanza and chorus, he describes a romantic encounter in which his desire to watch TV interrupts the sexual advances of his date, resulted in him not getting laid. We find silly lyrics throughout the story. For example, quote, "We started making out and she took off my pants, but then I turned on the TV. And that's about the time she walked away from me. Nobody likes you when you're 23. Hiatus' second verse and chorus communicates a separate story, albeit on the same timeline. While heading home from his date, he prank calls the mother of the woman he turned the TV on. He impersonates a police officer, claiming that her husband had been arrested. In this story, Hiatus fails to convince the mother, giving way to the peak immaturity of the second story with him exclaiming in the chorus, quote, "And that's about the time that bitch hung up on me. Nobody likes you when you're 23, and are still more amused by prank phone calls. What the hell is call ID?" At the end of the song, instead of reckoning with the consequences of his childishness, Hiatus proudly takes ownership of his callowness, singing, quote, "No one should take themselves so seriously, with many years ahead to fall in line. Why would you wish that on me? I never want to act my age. What's my age again? What's my age again?" Apparently, these poetically crafted tales struck a chord with the youth of Middle America, as What's My Age Again hit number 58 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 2 on the rock charts, easily eclipsing Damn It as their most successful song of their career. That status as their biggest hit didn't last too long. Moving into the new millennium, All the Small Things, the second single from Enema of the State, peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 1 on the rock charts. To date, it's not only Blink-182's most successful single, but perhaps one of the most successful singles in the history of pop punk. Like its predecessors, All the Small Things galvanized the youth through its musical simplicity, melodic catchiness, and lyrical immaturity. While maybe not as juvenile as What's My Age Again, the song gave the kids of my generation the license to rebelliously sing the famous line from the second verse, quote, "Late night, come home, work sucks, I know." Emphasizing, obviously, the word sucks. Of course, we exclusively sang that line when our parents weren't in the room. Blink-182 gets a little silly again in the choruses, with DeLonge singing the nonsensical syllable nah a total of 40 times. Apparently, the Ramones inspired the lyric of the chorus, which makes this now the third time I've mentioned that legendary punk band on this podcast, and I promise you it won't be the last. Blink-182 made up for any adolescent humor lacking in the lyrics with the music video, which featured the common late 90s/early 2000s trope of poking fun at the boy bands and pop stars of the time, mocking the usual suspects NSYNC, the Backstreet Boys, Britney Spears, and Christina Aguilera. To consummate the presence of silly, Mark Hoppus can be seen throughout in various sequences wearing nothing except whitey tighties and a sailor hat. So, with their first 3 major hits, it seemed the pop-punk trio was destined to maintain their sophomoric ethos and live forever as the band that inspired you to shoot spitballs at your friends. However, less than a month after All the Small Things, peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100, Blink-182 changed the trajectory of their entire career and what they stood for with the release of Enema of the State's third single, Atom Song, which opens with the line, quote, "I never thought I'd die alone. I laughed the loudest. Who'd have known?" The song centers on the suicidal ideation of the narrator, sung and written by Hiatus, who inches closer and closer throughout the song to ending his own life. In the beginning of the first verse, Hiatus hints at the idea. However, the second half of the first verse guides listeners to the crux of the overall theme by referencing the Nirvana song Come As You Are, with the lines, quote, "I took my time, I hurried up, the choice was mine, I didn't think enough." This Nirvana allusion demonstrates Hiatus's surprising songwriting abilities. Following the suicide of Kurt Cobain in 1994, the chorus of Come As You Are, with the repeated lyrics, quote, "And I swear that I don't have a gun," became a sad irony given the method in which Cobain took his life. Thus, Hiatus's decision to allude to that particular song sets the tone for the morose second verse. Following the chorus, in which Hiatus recounts the melancholy he felt returning home from the band's previous tour, his suicidal ideation increases as he shares musings common for people battling those demons, with lines, quote, "Give all my things to all my friends, you'll never step foot in my room again," and, quote, "Please tell Mom this is not her fault." After the second chorus, the song contains a piano-heavy interlude, rare for the band at the time. The interlude ends with a series of crescendos, culminating with its final one featuring an epic Travis Barker drum fill leading into the explosive last chorus. The gargantuan end of the song transitions the tone to uplifting with a change from the past tense, utilized in the first two choruses, to the future. For example, in the first two choruses, Hiatus sings, quote, "16 just held such better days." However, following the interlude, the lyrics change to, quote, "Tomorrow holds such better days." Additionally, in the first two choruses, he reminisces of, quote, "days when I still felt alive." But in the final chorus, he looks forward to, quote, "days when I can still feel alive." The song is undeniably a beautiful anti-suicide song. Forgive me for getting personal, but it's hard for me not to get emotional about this song, because in addition to losing a close friend from my adolescence to suicide while I was in college, it was Atom Song that introduced me to the tragic but real concept of a person taking their own life. The juxtaposition between the moods of this song and the previous singles from Enema of the State proved that both silly and somber could coexist in the catalog of Blink-182. Atom Song reached number 2 on the rock charts, and at the end of 2000, it ranked number 7 on the year-end rock charts. 23 years later, with over 250 million plays on Spotify, the song remains among Blink-182's most popular with the fan base. On June 12, 2001, carrying the torch as the world's premier pop-punk band, and pretty much rock's premier band, Blink-182 released Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, their follow-up to their 5 times platinum crossover album. With the platform that the success of Enema of the State created, each member of the band felt ambitious. Hiatus wanted to take the ethos of that record and replicate it, albeit as a bigger, better, and louder record. Perhaps emboldened by the critical and commercial success of Atom Song, DeLonge wanted to capitalize on that momentum and make music that would help the band appear more serious. Furthermore, around that time he listened heavily to post-hardcore bands such as Fugazi and Refused, wanting Take Off Your Pants and Jacket to draw influence from those artists. Barker, who before joining Blink had played for the comedy ska band The Aquabats, was listening to genres distinct from pop-punk, such as hip-hop and heavy metal. Therefore, the contrasts and desired outcomes provided for difficulties in the writing and recording process, especially the latter. Barker recorded his drum parts before Hiatus or DeLonge recorded anything, so when the two of them went into the studio, the differences in their approach led to a contentious experience. On the making of Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, Hiatus stated, quote, "For the first time, 3 of us worked in opposition to one another. We weren't starting from the same point or working toward the same goal." Nonetheless, the three members put together a record that they felt good about. But when they showed the all but finished product to their manager, Rick DeVoe, he critiqued it, lamenting the lack of a all the small things type hit, saying, quote, "I don't hear that thing, that Blink-182 Good Time Summer anthem thing." Both Hiatus and DeLonge shared the same anger toward the comment that DeVoe made, but acquiesced, each individually crafting what they deemed would result as a pop hit. Those two songs, The Rock Show, written by Hiatus, and DeLonge's First Date, perhaps two of the silliest songs of the album, satisfied DeVoe's wishes, as both songs became major hits, and to date, both rank in the band's top 7 most streamed songs on Spotify, with over 187 million and 337 million plays, respectively. Riding the success of the album's predecessor and the previously mentioned single, The Rock Show, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 200. Musically, the album's first half follows the pop-punk flavor that dominated Enema of the State, perhaps with slightly increased dynamics. The second half of the record, starting off with Stay Together for the Kids, which we'll circle back to in a bit, showcased their musical maturation. On the 10th track, Every Time I Look for You, which arguably showcased their best dynamics up to that point in their discography, Blink-182 exemplified their compositional and instrumental development. Although it's a standard pop-punk tune, the rhythm and the melody and the explosive interlude that follows Hiatus' bass solo at around the 2-minute mark not only ranks as one of the finest moments on the record, but foreshadows the album's successor. Lyrically, while on Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, the band opted not to expand too much on the maturity found on Adam's song, with the exception of Happy Holidays You Bastard, which sounds like it was written by a group of 13-year-old boys. The band did make a concerted effort to avoid toilet humor and other cheap laughs, in favor of more significant meaning. The best songs lyrically include the previously mentioned Every Time I Look for You, which, while yes, it does discuss the tired theme of teenage love, Hiatus' crafty word choice elevates the song's youthful spirit with the lines such as, quote, "One more point of contention, I need some intervention, approach with vague intentions, betray my short attention," as well as, quote, "Every time I look for you, the sun goes down, and I stumble when this whole thing runs aground." On the album's penultimate song, Shut Up, Hiatus utilizes heavy vulgarity to express the anger that a toxic couple possesses during their breakup. For example, the song opens from the woman's perspective with the line, quote, "Shut the fuck up," she said. "I'm going fucking deaf. You're always too loud. Everything's too loud." And even when cursing isn't present, scathing language prevails, such as the line, quote, "Your life is meaningless. It's going nowhere. You're going nowhere." So it might seem counterintuitive that I chose this song as an example of their maturity as songwriters. But in discussing the heavy theme of a toxic relationship, Hiatus's fearlessly blunt language communicates the story impeccably to listeners, all within an accessible musical framework. Saving the record's most potent discussion for last, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket's third single, Stay Together for the Kids, remains perhaps the most bleak within their discography. In it, Hiatus and DeLonge express the experience of growing up during their respective parents' divorce. Gut-wrenching lines from the song include, quote, "I'm ripe with things to say, the words rot and fall away. What stupid poem could fix this home? I'd read it every day." Those lines were from Mark Hoppus. On DeLonge's side, he sings in the chorus, quote, "So when you're dead and gone, will you remember this night, 20 years now lost? It's not right." The song inadvertently has a historical component to it. The original music video, shot on September 9th and 10th of 2001, features a wrecking ball smashing a house to visually represent the term broken home. The production crew ultimately had to reshoot the video due to the similarity in image between the original and the September 11th attacks that occurred just a day later. Of all the songs off Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, Stay Together for the Kids parallels Adam's song most, even including heavy use of the piano, as did Adam's song. Following the release and success of Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, the future of Blink-182 seemed uncertain as Tom DeLonge and Travis Barker formed a side project with guitarist David Kennedy called Boxcar Racer. The exclusion of Mark Hoppus from the project left him feeling, quote, weird, betrayed, jealous. Nonetheless, the band worked on their follow-up album with producer Jerry Finn, who had already worked with the band on their 2 previous albums and whose pop-punk credentials rank second to none, having worked with iconic acts within the subgenre such as Rancid, Green Day, New Found Glory, The Offspring, Sum 41, and Alkaline Trio. The inspiration for the album seemed on brand for the trio, as the group rented out a mansion, smoked quite a bit of weed, and spent a ton of money on adult films. Fun fact, they got evicted from that mansion. Anyways, on November 17, 2003, they released their 5th studio album, titled Blink-182, though the band refuses to refer to the record as self-titled, instead insisting on the nickname of Untitled. Tom explained the reasoning of the band's preference to Billboard magazine upon the album's release, stating, quote, actually, the worst thing in the world that can happen is people think we are trying to make some big, bold statement. That's why we try to say it's not self-titled, it's just untitled. We didn't want to label it with anything. We didn't want to label it with a joke title that people might expect. We didn't want to label it with some serious phrase that the whole record would have to somehow relate to. We left it untitled so it would speak for itself. Let's get to the commercial success of the record, and so we can get it out of the way. The album debuted at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 200, selling negligibly less than its predecessor in the first week. Untitled went on to sell over 2 million copies in the US and 7 million copies worldwide. The album spawned 2 mega hits, the opening song Feeling This, which peaked at number 2 on the rock charts, and I Miss You, the album's 3rd track, which to date remains the band's 2nd most successful single on the charts, peaking at number 1 on the rock charts and number 42 on the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart. The band's 2 other singles from the album, Down and Always, found moderate success as well, with the former resulting in a top 10 spot on the rock charts in the summer of 2004. In terms of music, lyrics, and production, Untitled proclaimed Blink-182 as a changed band. The album still features a decent amount of their signature pop-punk sound on songs such as Here's Your Letter and Feeling This, but the heart of the record displays a diverse range of genres, flavors, and textures. Untitled serves as a departure from their previous records, featuring multiple ballads, a more hardcore brand of punk, for the gnarlier tunes, and elements of post-punk, new wave, hip-hop, and ethereal. In terms of production, Blink-182 experimented with non-instrumental sounds such as finger snaps in the 4th track, Violence, and NASA radio transmissions in the record's 10th track, Asthenia. They also include 2 standalone interludes, an unprecedented move for them. Perhaps leaving their comfort zone not only resulted in their longest album in terms of actual time, but also helped Blink-182 reach a level of concentration on Untitled absent from its predecessors. That focus enabled what many view as a concept album. It's hard to ignore the frequency of songs detailing the trauma, pain, and mental instability stemming from the end of a relationship. 9 songs off Untitled center on the impending loss of love or already severed romantic partnership, while the other songs on the album explore different themes such as hopelessness, paranoia, maliciousness, and lust. After the opening track, Feeling This, the element of loss remains consistent throughout. Their 2003 effort saw Hoppus and DeLonge take quantum leaps as songwriters. With sophomoric humor absent, Hoppus and DeLonge builds upon maturity displayed on Adam's song, Stay Together for the Kids, and Every Time I Look for You. For example, Hoppus, who went from singing on their debut LP, quote, "My love life was getting so bland. There are only so many ways I can make love with my hand. Sometimes it makes me want to laugh. Sometimes I want to take my toaster in the bath." To autobiographically telling the painful story of the domestic abuse his mother faced on Untitled's 9th track, with the 2nd verse reading, quote, "Mom, get in the car and let's drive away. She said, 'I'm sorry, Mark, but there's nowhere to stay.' Gave up all her hope and went back inside, hit her broken heart and let the engine die." DeLonge, for his part, only a couple years prior, when reminiscing over his educational career, cried, quote, "I learned a lot today. Not sure if I'll get laid. Not sure if I'll fail or pass. Kissed every girl in class." However, after the copious amount of pornos and weed, DeLong counterintuitively paints his stories on Untitled with a more mature brush. For example, in the second verse of the album's second song, DeLong sings about a bitter breakup, quote, "Can you comfort yourself with the sense of revenge? Are you leaving me here with the taste of the end?" Critically, the band's artful transition received praise from Rolling Stone, stating, quote, "Maturity suits these guys. 5 albums into their career, it sounds like they're just getting warmed up." Stephen Erlewine praised Hiatus and DeLong, stating, quote, "The songwriting is similarly adventurous, alternating punchy, impassioned punk pop with weirder atmospheric pieces." He also finished his review welcoming their, quote, "maturation." Despite the commercial and critical success, on February 22, 2005, spurred by DeLong's chronic back pain and desire to spend more time with his family, disagreement regarding the future of the band led them to announce an indefinite hiatus, all but breaking up the pop-punk titans. New groups, tragedy and triumph characterized Blink-182's 4-year hiatus. In April of 2005, Hiatus announced that he and Barker, along with alternative rock guitarist Shane Gallagher and Craig Faribault, formed a new group called Plus 44. If you view, as many do, a breakup as a competition, DeLong countered in September of that year, announcing the formation of his new band, Angels and Airwaves, recruiting 3 San Diego-based musicians, David Kennedy, Ryan Sin, and Adam Willard. On May 23, 2006, Angels and Airwaves released their first studio album, We Don't Need to Whisper. The album peaked at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 200 and went on to sell about 800,000 copies worldwide. The band released 4 singles to support the album, but only their lead single, The Adventure, approximated the success of any notable Blink-182 hit. The album generated mixed reviews from critics, garnering a lukewarm score of 53 out of 100 from Metacritic. In November of 2006, Plus 44 released their debut album, When Your Heart Stops Beating. The album chart performance lagged behind that of Angels and Airwaves, as the record barely cracked the top 10, and in When Your Heart Stops Beating's first 5 years, it managed to sell less than 300,000 copies. The album entertained critics only mildly, with a 60 rating from Metacritic. Thus, fans and critics spoke loudly to Mark, Tom, and Travis. They basically said, "We love y'all's musicians, but we love Blink better." Fast forward to September 19th, 2008, a day where the music almost died once again, but music itself and just about everything else became irrelevant. That day, Travis Barker boarded a private jet in Columbia, South Carolina, along with his best friend DJ AM, his personal assistant Chris Baker, and his security guard Charles Still. Upon takeoff, Barker heard a loud bang that sounded like gunshots. The pilots attempted to abort takeoff, but the lack of runway space led to them crashing onto a South Carolina highway. DJ AM and Barker managed to escape the plane. Covered in jet fuel, Barker removed his clothes and ultimately employed the stop, drop, and roll tactic taught in elementary school to effectively put out the fire that his body had endured. Still, 65% of his body had been burned, and everyone on the flight, including the pilots, died as a result of the crash, except for Barker and DJ AM. Barker spent 11 weeks following the crash in the hospital, undergoing 27 surgeries, which included skin grafts and transfusions. The aftermath of the plane crash led to DeLong reconnecting with Barker and ultimately Hiatus, eventually culminating in that long-awaited reunion in early 2009. The success of the band's comeback tour did not extend to Neighborhoods, their highly anticipated 6th studio album. The album was doomed from the get-go, as each member resided in a different location, with Hiatus living all the way in London. The distance forced each member to record most of their parts individually. To add insult to injury, the band chose to self-produce, due to the untimely death of their longtime producer, Jerry Finn. Additionally, tensions arose quickly between Hiatus and DeLong, eventually leading to communication between the two only occurring through each's manager. For Barker, he lamented getting back into the studio so quickly after his plane crash, referring to that process as, quote, a bloody mess. Despite the challenges, Blink-182 completed the record and subsequently released Neighborhoods on September 27, 2011, which upon release, Hiatus referred to as, quote, the best Blink-182 record. Initially, the album bested its untitled predecessor, debuting on the Billboard Hot 200 at number 2. Before discussing the album at a micro level, I will share the overall vibes I encountered upon many listens. I'm sure many fans pondered before the release of the record whether Blink-182 would cling to the maturity developed prior to their hiatus, or would they capitalize on humanity's undying gravitation to nostalgia and release an album filled with simple pop-punk jams about being silly. Blink unequivocally opted for the former. Lyrically, the album continued the morose sentiment found on Untitled. I was hard-pressed to find an optimistic song, as depression, anxiety, panic attacks, toxic people, addiction, and helplessness stick out as some of the album's themes. At 36 minutes, the non-deluxe version features 10 songs, and frankly, it's cohesive as hell. Stylistically, few outliers exist, and the dynamics keep the album interesting throughout. While the pop-punk ethos is palpable, Neighborhoods largely eludes the aggression of Untitled, with a greater emphasis on post-punk, incorporation of synths, and hip-hop drum beats. Regarding the record's post-punk credentials, the influence of the iconic English 80s band The Cure remains constant. I wonder if Robert Smith's feature on Untitled led to this influence. I probably should mention that Robert Smith is the singer of The Cure. Travis Barker kicks off the album with a hip-hop drum beat, with the synth quickly following in the opening track, Ghosts on the Dance Floor. The song contains hella post-punk and new wave vibes. With the band back in full swing, Travis cements the perception of him as the group's backbone with the beast of a drum solo before the song's final chorus. The gothic optic that the song's textures imagines perfectly sets the backdrop for the somber yet lovely lyrics. Tom DeLonge narrates a story of a man who has lost his significant other, but feels her presence when hearing a song that he and his partner had listened to together. In the first two choruses, DeLonge sings, quote, I saw your ghost tonight, the moment felt so real. But following Barker's drum solo, DeLonge gives listeners the feels, with the lyrical change to, quote, I saw your ghost tonight, it fucking hurt like hell. Many people viewed Ghosts on the Dance Floor as a tribute to DJ AM, the other survivor from the previously mentioned 2009 plane crash, who tragically died of an overdose less than a year after the crash. The album shifts directions on the second track, Natives. The prog punk tune features strong dynamics, and with its aggressive verses and catchy pop-punk chorus, it sounds like it could have been an outtake from Untitled. The tune really is vintage Blink, with DeLonge singing the verses, Hiatus singing the choruses, and Barker once again stealing the show. Barker plays various drum patterns using elements from disco, hip-hop, and punk. The lyrical content continues the somber tone of Neighborhood's first song, as the song displays the inner monologue of someone experiencing mental strife. Perhaps someone who faces intense pressures and feels they're unable to meet expectations. The vividness of the words shove the narrator's self-loathing in the listener's face with lines like, quote, I'm like a cat in a cage, locked up and battered and bruised. I am the prodigal son, a shameful prodigy too. As well as, quote, I'm just a bastard child, don't let it go to your head, I'm just a waste of your time, maybe I'm better off dead. Natives is, high-key, my favorite tune on the record. Blink-182 released their third song off the album, Up All Night, as a single on July 14th, 2011. When it came out, it was their first single since November of 2005, when they released Not Now to promote their greatest hits album. The decision of choosing this track as the lead single baffled people, as the song sounds more like an Angels and Airwaves song rather than any notable hit from Blink's previous catalog. That's not a dig at the song, as I do enjoy the kick-ass Queens of the Stone Age-like guitar riff from DeLonge. The tune genre bends, and each member contributes to the incorporation of multiple genres. Another song with strong dynamics, Blink utilizes elements of hip-hop, pop-punk, and indie rock in the hit single. The song concludes with two brief consecutive jams, one played halftime and the latter double time. The lyrics continue with the album's introspectively dark ethos. Up All Night discusses the inner turmoil that people deal with every day. With allusions to panic attacks and insomnia, the album focuses on the negative inevitabilities of the human experience. Concentrating on other negative components of personhood, DeLonge sings, quote, "Everyone lies and cheats, their wants and needs, and still believes their heart," showing compassion for the microtransgressions present in humanity. After Midnight, perhaps objectively the quote-unquote strongest song on the album, follows. Travis commences the album's fourth track and second single with a beat containing impressive hi-hat triplets reminiscent of a trap beat. The tune then quickly transitions into a tender post-punk ballad, once again embodying The Cure. We find significant ethereal vibes in this song that musically feels calm and peaceful, but not without a super catchy chorus. Not to sound like a broken record, but this song is not the happiest. Although, if you hold a magnifying glass up to the tone, you are poised to find a glimmer of hope. DeLonge and Hiatus sing the lukewarm love song about a couple far past the honeymoon phase of their relationship. A relationship that still only weakly endures due to personal struggles of the individuals involved. The lyrics make references to alcoholism being the culprit of their destructive behavior, with the line in the chorus, quote, "We'll stagger home after midnight, sleep arm in arm in the stairwell." Despite the precarious status of the relationship, the narrator's unrelenting affection for his partner prevents him from giving up. The song references "I Miss You" from Untitled in the opening of the second verse, with the line, quote, "I can't keep your voice out of my head." DeLonge said that he was thinking of that tune when Barker showed him the beat, resulting in him paying homage to the generational hit. The first half of the record concludes with the fifth tune, Hearts All Gone, which contrasts the relatively mellow previous track with a ferocious tempo. Its punk rock instrumentals echo the intensity of the instrumentals found on blank tracks such as Damn It, Easy Target, and Every Time I Look For You. As per usual, Barker steals the show with, in my humble opinion, his most technically impressive performance on the record. Wait, this is a show about hot takes, so this is Barker's most impressive drum performance of his career. Although the drums are the fanciest there, for me, DeLonge's ominous guitar defines Hearts All Gone. And surprise, surprise, the album's fifth track continues the dark lyrical tone of the album. The nefarious diction deals with the tragic tale of the narrator falling in love with a sadistic narcissist. Although the relationship started beneficially for the narrator, the malevolence of the antagonist soured the romance. The second half of Neighborhoods picks up where the first left off, as an upbeat sad boy piece of music titled Wishing Well. The song starts off with a post-punk riff before picking up steam during the verse, where it gives off the pop-punk vibes that characterized the band's glory days. The pre-chorus even features DeLonge singing random syllables just as he did in All the Small Things. Barker also embodies earlier Blink-182 with his pre-chorus drum roll with heavy flange on drums, just as he used in the intro of Feeling This. The melody of the chorus is perhaps one of the catchiest on the album, and the synth-filled bridge once again screams The Cure. Although various elements take listeners back to their silly, carefree times, the lyrics do not. In Wishing Well, depression and helplessness surround the narrator's attempts at self-improvement. However, these attempts only worsen his condition, as DeLonge sums up in the chorus with, quote, "I reached for a shooting star, it burned a hole through my hand." The song also references when DeLonge claimed that Angels and Airwaves would be the biggest band in the world following the band's 2005 hiatus, a comment that DeLonge said was misinterpreted and perhaps spurred by his Vicodin addiction he was dealing with at the time. Hiatus characterized the song as, quote, "very catchy, but the lyrics are really, really dark and a little depressing, but I like that about this record, and I think that this song kind of embodies that notion." I completely agree with Hiatus here. Great song, but probably not a good song to blast at a party. Unless it's a follow-up to It's My Party, I'll Cry If I Want To. The seventh song on Neighborhoods, Kaleidoscope, reminds me of the Beatles song She Said, She Said. I know it's far-fetched, but hear me out. Barker's beat and frequent use of the toms along with the melody in the verse for some reason always brings my mind to that psychedelic rock classic. But I digress. Another song with strong dynamics, and another song where Barker steals the show. Barker especially shows off with his polyrhythms in the first and second chorus. Speaking of the choruses, each possesses a different level of intensity, culminating with an explosive third chorus. The bridge on this one is particularly gnarly. Aggressive yet melodic, sandwiched between two separate hip-hop beats from Barker. The lyrics here depict the artistic compromise that musicians face when dealing with the business side of their work. When Hiatus sings, the lyrics focus on the negative side of the trade-off of being a working musician, with lines such as, quote, "Let the hours tick past the deadline, get another stamp in your passport, wash your breakfast down with some red wine." When DeLonge sings the chorus, I get the impression that he's communicating the anxieties associated with the band's reunion. Hiatus completely debunks my well-thought-out analysis, saying, quote, "It is kind of being a slacker in 2011, kind of the 20s and 30s malaise that is America right now. That's kind of what it's about. I hope that makes sense." Well, I guess it makes sense. Whatever. The album starts winding down with its 8th track, This Is Home. With it, ladies and gentlemen, we finally get a somewhat happy song. Musically, it blends the old sound of Blink-182 with the new, combining a pop-punk beat, riff, and vocals with the synth. The band once again employs the influence of The Cure with an acoustic guitar played throughout, reminiscent of the iconic 80s band's 1985 hit In Between Days. Lyrically, as I said, we finally have a song without doom and gloom. Probably the only song possessing the lyrical ethos of their early days, DeLonge sings about being a reckless concert-going in a concert that ended in a riot. The word choice here basks in the immaturity found back in their pre-Untitled era, with lines such as, quote, "We fucking fight like vagabonds, we dance like fucking animals," and, quote, "Get close, the crowd will come apart, that girl will try to make you hard." Thus, I think the title of This Is Home adequately labels Neighborhood's 8th song. The record's penultimate song has the weirdest name on the album. MH418-2011 was the name of the song's file on Hiatus' computer, and the band left the name unchanged because they thought it sounded like a virus. The song opens with a bang, containing the aggression similar to the song Obvious off of Untitled. Despite its aggressive introduction, the poppy chorus is damn well catchy. With its unrelenting intensity, it aligns most with the band's sound historically. I'm not even going to sum up the tone of the lyrics because y'all know where I'm going. The lyrics detail a community living in war-torn desolation. In the chorus, Hiatus seems to help the community navigate their harsh realities with the opening line, quote, "Hold on, the worst is yet to come." The verses are pretty bleak and culminate with the second verse ending, quote, "Let it burn, let it fall, let the end of the world come, who's left to care." Finally, Blink-182 closes their post-hiatus LP with a stylistic outlier. Love is Dangerous sounds like a song processed in a lab to emulate in equal parts The Cure and The Killers. The song concludes with the heaviest usage of the instrument contributing most to their new sound, the synth. Continuing the theme of strong dynamics, the interesting bridge contains that synth, as well as polyrhythms from Barker and DeLonge's driving octaves. The gargantuan final chorus crashes and burns on its way to the decrescendoed ending of the song and album. The lyrics end the album as they dominated throughout, on a somber note. Detailing the severe heartbreak stemming from a non-mutual breakup, the words read like a B-side from Untitled. The lyrics are hopeless, romantically nihilistic, and further continue the hellish spiral that the narrator on Neighborhoods endures. Well, folks, there you have an in-depth description of Blink-182's first album back after their hiatus. This album ushered in a new era for the band, as I like to call it, the post-hiatus era. As you could probably tell, I think Neighborhood is a terrific record, albeit flawed. Critics generally agreed and seemed to enjoy the album, with an overall score of 69 for Metacritic, just under the score of 71 that their predecessor received. AllMusic awarded the album 4 stars out of 5. Stephen Erlewine, who wrote the review, concluded his article asserting that, quote, the hiatus did them some good. Also, both Entertainment Weekly and the AV Club rated Neighborhoods as a B-. The highest praise the album received came from IGN, a video game and entertainment media website who lauded the record with a 9 out of 10 rating. Fans, on the other hand, weren't particularly impressed. Although the album debuted at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 200, higher than the high watermark of their predecessor, it significantly undersold compared with their 4 previous albums. Now, of course, someone could point out that in 2011 versus 1997 to 2003, the period where Blink released a string of 4 platinum albums, the presence of illegal downloading and the emergence of streaming platforms such as Spotify diminished the significance of album sales. But even if we take a look at Neighborhood's average album track stream on Spotify, which is definitely a legitimate statistic and not something I made up 3 seconds ago, it had an average album track stream of just under 22.5 million, with its most played song After Midnight garnering about 52 million streams. In case you're curious, the average album track stream adds up the total Spotify streams of songs on an album and divides it by the number of songs. Untitled's AATS, that's what I'm calling my cool stat now, is currently over 85 million, with I Miss You as its most played song with about 630 million streams. Untitled's predecessor, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket, currently has an AATS of about 79 million, with its most played song, First Date, garnering roughly 343 million streams. Since I'm already on the tangent of my cool statistic, let's look at their breakthrough album, Enema of the State. With an AATS of nearly 168 million, that 1999 icon currently has 7 times the AATS of Neighborhoods. Listeners have streamed the band's biggest hit, All the Small Things, most, with a plays amount of roughly 850 million. So now that I've brought math into the podcast, I have to ask the million-dollar question. This summer, when millions of people attend Blink-182 concerts, why will most people choose to use the restroom if and when the band plays anything from Neighborhoods? In other words, why is the band's 6th studio album, their comeback album, a forgotten one? Well, 2 reasons come to mind for me. The first deals with the presence of pop-punk, the genre most associated with the band. While pop-punk exploded in the early 90s with bands such as Green Day and The Offspring, the genre peaked in the late 90s and early 2000s, with Blink-182 serving as the poster child for the cultural zeitgeist. Other bands such as Jimmy Eat World, Sum 41, and Good Charlotte rose to prominence around that time as well. But in the mid-aughts, with bands such as Fall Out Boy, My Chemical Romance, and Panic at the Disco, pop-punk took on darker tones, and the label of emo seemed to overtake pop-punk in the mainstream musical lexicon. By the time the early 2000s rolled around, neither emo nor pop-punk approximated the levels of commercial success they were accustomed to. Even bands that retained popularity traditionally associated with the pop-punk label, such as Fall Out Boy and Paramore, deviated from the sound that endeared fans of the genre only a half-decade prior. Thus, the timing of the release of Neighborhoods in the midst of the declining popularity of the genre perhaps diminished the enthusiasm surrounding the record. For the other reason, we have to revisit March 14th, 2000 once again. When Adam's song came out, for better or for worse, Blink-182 was a new band. After that single came out, they effectively became a serious band more focused on subject matters of societal importance, rather than the toilet humor that dominated the vast majority of their first 3 studio albums. They acquiesced to their manager's demands on Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. Without the 2 silly singles, First Date and The Rock Show, which were written last minute, the only remaining single would have been Stay Together for the Kids, the intense song about growing up in a broken home. Although the band relished in their new identity of mature, listeners weren't as enthralled with the serious tunes. You might be thinking, but Dove, Blink-182 released their Untitled album, which you even said is far more mature than anything they had ever done, and they still had 2 huge hits from that album. Well, that's true, but let's look at those 2 big hit singles, Feeling This and I Miss You. While the instrumental and production side of Feeling This presented unprecedented dynamics, the sexually explicit lyrics saw the band retain the silliness that endeared millions to the band in 1997 when Damn It came out. For example, the second stanza of Feeling This's first verse reads, quote, "Show me the way to bed, show me the way you move, Fuck It's Such a Blur, I Love All the Things You Do. Not exactly a Pablo Neruda poem here. The other hit single from the record, I Miss You, certainly doesn't contain the overt silliness of feeling this. But to express its own immaturity, I have to once again bring up my dad. On the car ride from New York to Florida when we moved in the summer of 2005, I popped Untitled into my mom's minivan CD player. When it came time for the first chorus and Tom DeLonge repeatedly sings in his pop-punk accent, quote, the voice inside my head, not really spacing out the word my and head, my dad, doing his best dad jokes, sarcastically asked me, Dove, what's a yed? DeLonge's over-the-top vocals, as soon as they kick in, have become memeified over the years due to the way in which he sings inherently silly lyrics, such as, quote, and as I stare I counted, the webs from all the spiders, catching things and eating their insides. So while they certainly don't stoop to the level of immaturity of Dysentery Gary, The Party Song, or Happy Holidays You Bastard, they certainly don't reach the level of seriousness of, say, Adam's song, Stay Together for the Kids, or, well, songs about being reminded of deceased loved ones, or insomnia, or an emotional helplessness. Themes found throughout Neighborhoods. In the 36 minutes of Neighborhoods, with all of the instrumental prowess, lyrical thoughtfulness, and catchy melodies, the lighthearted silliness that endeared people to the band, starting for many in 1997 when Mark Hoppus asked, quote, did you hear he fucked her? Cannot be found. In 2016, after the departure of Tom DeLonge, the band released a follow-up album, California, with former Alkaline Trio frontman Matt Skiba replacing DeLonge. The album in many ways returned to their silliness of old with an interlude of Hoppus proclaiming, quote, I want to see some naked dudes, that's why I built this pool. Additionally, one of their biggest hits from the album, the silly light-hearted pop-punk ditty She's Out of Her Mind, sounds like a B-side from Enema of the State or Take Off Your Pants and Jacket with its musical simplicity and jovial lyrics such as, quote, I'm in deep with this girl, but she's out of her mind. Whoa. She said, babe, I'm sorry, but I'm crazy tonight. Whoa. Perhaps in part due to the departure from the intensity and maturity of Neighborhoods, California eclipsed its predecessor with an AATS of 45.5 million, bolstered in part through its top song Bored to Death, which has 148 million plays on Spotify. I'll end this segment bringing it back to the Beatles. When they changed directions in 1965 with their release of Rubber Soul, their songwriting improved, their lyrics diversified, and their instrumentation became more complex. But with their maturity, audiences grew with them, and consequently, their commercial success and cultural influence increased. For my generation's Beatles, Blink-182, they did not garner the same audience response when they made similar changes, and thus, Neighborhoods, the seemingly poster child of those changes, has become a forgotten album. I met my next guest 3.5 years ago, and of course, our first friendly debate was about Blink-182. In addition to being a close friend, he's also my bandmate. So although he's an economist by day, he rocks both the keyboards and the mic when he's out of the office. He also hosts some of the best parties I've ever been to, so if you haven't attended one, just show up to the next. He won't care. Please welcome Russell Ramtahal.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And we were just talking about, I know that, you've done your Kentucky Derby parties 2 years running. Can you tell people a little bit about that?
Yeah, big party thrower. Love having a good time. So Kentucky Derby party, we had, food, drinks. We had a full cocktail bar. We also, I have to have mint juleps on the Kentucky Derby. But we also, I kind of went overboard. I had some prizes and contests. There was a best hat contest. You could win a bunch of prizes, and yeah, it was a pretty fun time.
Oh yeah, it was awesome. And I won a stress ball, and of course, I've already broken it.
I figured you probably would have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a little too stressed out and the ball just burst.
When you know somebody with antidepressants, like, you probably shouldn't also give them a stress ball.
Yeah.
They're gonna break it.
That's fair point. But anyways, let's get right into it. So, what kind of music do you listen to the most currently?
By far, it's got to be pop punk. That's probably the most common thing I've listened to my whole life.
Well, that's why we have you here.
Yeah, I mean, I figured if there's going to be one episode I'm on, it's going to be about this.
So I assume that your parents didn't spoon feed you pop punk as a child. So what kind of music were you spoon fed?
I wasn't spoon fed anything in particular, but one thing that was always there was like blues. So my parents are kind of old too. Like, my parents are kind of old. Hopefully they don't hear this. But my dad was born in 1955. And so, what is he, late 60s now? So I grew up listening to a lot of, like, he loved crooner music. So I listened to a lot of, like, Frank Sinatra.
Really?
But he also loved some of the old funk stuff. So, like, I listened to a lot of Stevie Wonder growing up. I listened to a lot of Ray Charles growing up. But my mom was more into, like, Bob Dylan and, like, blues and stuff. So she would listen to, who was some big bands that she used to listen to too? I know that I just said those two genres, but really the first thing that came to my mind was the Eagles. My mom loved the Eagles. So I listened to a lot of them, listened to a lot of Van Morrison, Bob Dylan. There was a guy that she really liked called Johnny Lang, really good blues rock guitarist. So yeah, that was kind of like the genre. I didn't grow up listening to like rock music though. Like, I didn't listen to like AC/DC or Metallica or I didn't have those kind of parents that
Your parents were into the hard stuff.
No, the best thing was the Eagles. That was the most rock and roll I had.
I'm trying to think. The most rock and roll I think I had was the Who.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because my dad who was also born in '55, and I talk about it in the intro of this episode. But I was always spoon fed the Beatles. I mean, that's by far his favorite band of all time. But he also likes to spoon fed me the Eagles, Steve Miller Band. Who are the others? Like a lot of those. Oh, Bob Dylan as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he loves all that stuff.
Yeah, I think I would wake up in the morning to my mom cleaning on Sunday mornings, and it would be mostly Van Morrison playing though. You'd hear Brown Eyed Girl or Moon Dance, and then you have to go mop or something.
What's the Tupelo Honey?
Yeah. Yeah,
I remember they mentioned that on an episode of Friends. They were having a conversation, the most romantic song of all time, and I think David Schwimmer's character Ross said Tupelo Honey, and I still haven't listened to it, so I don't know.
It's one of those songs that it's like I don't really know much about. I mean, like I said, I grew up listening to him, but I don't know like Van Morrison's like discography.
Yeah, same. I didn't even know. I found out. I didn't even know he was Irish. I had no idea.
Van Morrison, is that an Irish name? It doesn't. I mean.
Well,
I don't know.
You think Van Halen, like that's Dutch. So I have no idea.
Who knows?
Yeah.
White people. I can say that. I know this is a podcast and we're not videotaping it, but I can say it.
We should. We got to get a simulcast going.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. I might have to get better looking though if we do that.
Yeah. Well,
anyways.
Or just get a good camera, or a bad camera, depending on what way you're looking at it.
But when did you, so obviously, I mean, more than any friend that I have, you are the pop punk guy. When did you start to discover music on your own, and was it pop punk that you discovered?
It's interesting. I think musical taste is a very interesting journey for anybody, because I think it starts off as a kid. You're doing what your parents like, and then you go into school, and then you do what the other kids are liking, and you're trying to stay, relevant. You're not trying to be cool particularly, but you want to stay in your lane. And so I think that's what led me to be into so much pop music in the beginning. But it wasn't until I got into probably early high school, honestly. Actually, not even that. I would say middle school, probably mid to late middle school. I started to really love rock music. I started to get and by rock I mean pop rock. Like I said, never been a huge Metallica guy. Never been into a lot of that stuff. I respect it and I actually do listen to it occasionally, but it's just never been my primary. But I wanted to be in a band. I wanted to do all these things, and I was starting to learn music because I was taking all these music classes in middle school. And so that's when I started to like solidify this persona as, oh, I'm going to be a musician. This is me. I'm going to have a rock star lifestyle. Look at me now. Yeah, I would say around mid to late middle school is when I started to really find these bands and kind of tie an identity to them in some way.
So that kind of answered the next question I was going to ask was what kind of music you got into when you started to discover music. And so it sounds like it was pop rock before the pop punk, or...
Yeah, I mean, I would just say the radio.
Yeah.
The radio was like a big thing. I listened to, because I grew up in a interesting area where it was like predominantly like white kids wanting to be gangster, which is always a fun thing. And so they would always listen to like gangster rap music. And, Eminem was big back then, so you'd had that. 50 Cent was blowing up. So it was like all these different things were hitting. And so, I listened to a lot of that. I listened to a lot of Eminem, a lot of 50 Cent. And then I started going down the rabbit hole for like random ciphers I would find online. I would listen to this guy like Papoose, who's like a big New York rapper. And so I got really, really into rap for a long time. And that was the first thing, but it was mostly pop music, like just trying to listen to the radio. I wasn't the kind of kid who would, ask for CDs or go to stores or things like that. I would definitely go to like FYE and like sit there and listen to stuff. I think that was the first time I ever listened to POD.
Was FYE? Dude, that place was awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
Was like, it had everything you need, and you could listen to the albums.
That's what I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, how would COVID ever? How would FYE ever have survived COVID? It's so good that they failed before COVID happened, so they didn't have to deal with that massive problem.
I remember they sold concert tickets too.
They did?
Yeah, I remember I was at FYE. This had to be like around like 2006, 2007, and this dude like bought Stone Sour tickets like right in front of me. Like I was like getting a CD or a poster or whatever.
Wow, I didn't know that. I would just go in there because my mom would be at JCPenney and I had to kill time. So.
Did you do like was it Hot Topic then to FYE?
I went to Hot Topic. I went to Spencer's when I shouldn't have. I would pretty much there was this place called Bourbon Street Chicken across from the Panda Express. I would get so much bourbon chicken.
Did you actually buy it, or did you just have as many free samples as you could?
Two things can be true. Two things can be true.
Yeah. All right, so let's get into Blink-182. When did you first hear of them?
So my cousin is older than me. I had a cousin who would babysit me a lot, and she was probably, what is she now? I think she's got to be like almost a decade older than me, but probably more like 6 to 8 years. So she would babysit us a lot. And so I would say in mid-elementary school, let's say like 3rd, 4th grade, she had been playing stuff in the car, and I was like, what is this? What is this? What is this? And I found out it was Blink-182, and I was like, this is great, along with things like Sum 41 and things like that. And then I remember them being on like Now This Is Music 4 or something.
Oh, they were probably on so many. Yeah. That's what I call music.
And I think that's when I really started to be like, this is something that I'm going to like. It's weird because it was so early. It was like elementary school. I started to like them. But then I went to schools and I started listening to rap way more, and I put away my rock. Mm-hmm. And then it was like late middle school. I was like, I'm a rocker again. It was like this weird transformation. I would wear, like I'm telling you, I used to wear the super long polos with the Dickies shorts. I looked like a literal cholo walking around. So it was fun. It was a good time.
That's awesome. And what are some of your favorite, like, I know you've told me that you're not like the kind of person who's going to sit down and listen to an album often. But do you have any favorite Blink-182 albums, or even if you just have any favorite songs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be corny. I want to preface a lot of this by saying, like, I'm not a Blink-182 mega fan. Like, I love Blink-182, and they're probably one of my favorite bands. But what I categorize as a mega fan is probably different than what most people would, where it's like, I'm not going to know the whole album. I'm not going to sit back to back. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to do a lot of that stuff. If I like it, I like it. So I don't want to put up false pretenses here of like, mm-hmm. wow, this guy knows so much about Blink-182, and then we have mega fans listening maybe one day, and then they're just like, this guy doesn't know shit. And so it's like, well, no, obviously. But I will say, answering your question now with that preface, Take Off Your Pants and Jacket was by far my favorite album by a long shot. I think it it was the most nostalgic for me. It was the first full album I had ever had in my life. And it was, I remember just listening to it on repeat on the school bus. I had very like vivid memories of that. So, and on that album, I think First Date is something I will never not put on a playlist in my life.
Well, I talk about I don't know if you know this, but I learned this when I was making this episode. But First Date and Rock Show were not supposed to be on Take Off Your Pants and Jacket.
Really?
Yeah, their manager, like they essentially had finished the album. They showed it to the manager, and he's like, "Yeah, it's good, but there's like I don't hear that like All the Small Things type song." And so like, and Mark and Tom were like both pretty pissed off, but they're like, well, we'll put something together. And Mark went and wrote The Rock Show, and Tom went and wrote First Date. But First Date for me, like the first time I heard Travis's drum intro, I was like, damn, this is a good song. I think I was like 11 when I heard it, and it was like, oh man, this is awesome.
I think was it Every Time I Look for You was like another one of my real big favorites.
That's great. I talk about that a lot in this episode. Another thing I noticed is that for me, the second half of that album is fire.
Yeah, it's so good. And it's really interesting because we can sit here and talk forever about the stylistic choices and the music theory behind it. But at the end of the day, they obviously have a very core sound that's very identifiable. And I think what people think of who is Blink-182 today, I think of their core sound being really solidified in the second half of that album. I feel like that's really who they are.
Well, that's a great point, and I really feel like moving forward, especially on Untitled, which I've told you is by far my favorite Blink-182. It's actually just one of my favorite albums of all time. Is their Untitled, and I think a lot of that, I think that there's like a lineage between, like the second half of Take Off Your Pants and Jacket and Untitled, and then going beyond Neighborhoods as well.
Yeah, 100%.
But anyways, and I know you've covered a bunch of Blink-182 songs over the years with various bands. I know because I'm in one of them.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite to cover?
I Miss You is so fun because it's not the typical vibe, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a really fun one to sing because of the classic, intro for Tom, the "Where Are You" kind of thing, just nasally. It's just so fun to like. There's just the memification of it. But I think that one, but also honestly, First Date is probably my favorite one to cover. I think it's just one of my favorite songs.
We should cover that.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah. But so why do you think that Blink has had such a big influence on alternative rock, pop punk, and really popular culture as a whole?
I think that they were. It's really the way I want to word this is that they weren't really punk in the punk way, right? And it's not like I'm not saying like, oh, they're sellouts or they're shills or they're fake. They're extremely real. But it was almost like if you could bottle punk and like sell it at like a theme park or something. It was just like it was just a very like I don't want to say commercialized because that also makes it sound like fake. Yeah. But it was approachable. It was accessible punk to the public. And it was a way of like showing like, hey, let's take all these super poppy elements of music and some of the colors and imagery, and let's put that into some really meaningful lyrics and some less meaningful lyrics over these like super heavy riffs, and let's not heavy, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Like intense driving riffs. Right. And
they can get kind of gnarly.
Yeah, it can. I've been to a few shows. It can get pretty wild, but it's you're not going to like this punk underground show to like smash bottles over people's heads and say, fuck the government. It's more of like, oh, my girlfriend kind of sucks. And it's like stuff that I think in the 90s and early 2000s, that was just the entire vibe. Like I think of like MTV, like you remember those shows like Next or
it was The Real World. Yeah,
The Real World, or like what was it, Room Raiders, things like that. It's like that is one whole entire like, I don't know, it's like a fog to me because it's like that was a crazy time, and I always think about Blink-182 for early 2000s, like and late 90s, because that was the aesthetic.
I think what's my age again? There was a Blink-182 song that was an American Pie. And I don't know which song, and I've actually never seen American Pie, but I know the legacy that it has, for better or for worse. And I feel like Blink-182 is like the perfect band to have a song featured in that movie, because I feel like that's kind of what they were about at that point.
I don't remember what song it was either. Part of me wants to say it was First Date, but I don't think it is. But they were actually in that movie too. Like the three of them were, Travis, Tom, and Mark. They were in that movie.
And if there's one band, whenever that, like the year that movie came out, if there was one band that you would want in that kind of movie, it's Blink-182.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would argue that we're not talking about them, but I would argue Sum 41 is adjacent to them.
Yeah, but they're Canadians,
but they're fun.
Although Eugene Levy is Canadian, so
yeah, exactly. We're all a little Canadian if you don't think about it.
And I was thinking about this the other day, because I think the reason that they've had such a big influence on alternative rock and pop punk is that, like, for me, I've never really considered myself like a pop punk fan. Like, I love playing it on drums. It's a lot of fun to play on drums, but like I never really seeked out pop punk. But Blink-182, since I was a kid, they've always been my favorite band. But I think like you as a pop punk fan, like they're you'd probably consider them like titans of that genre.
Yeah.
And so I just think that, like, talking about that accessibility, they're not niche like some other pop punk bands. Like I feel like maybe Newfound Glory or like Cartel are a little bit more niche, whereas like Blink-182, I think you made a good point, like they're just more accessible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, you mentioned Cartel as one of the bands, and I was like, I didn't even really know any Cartel music until probably like mid to late high school. So it's like it took me a while to kind of get into the real genre. It's weird because I know that it's so hard to say. It's like, yes, Blink-182 is pop punk, but when people say, "Oh, do you listen to pop punk music?" Blink-182 actually doesn't pop into my head because they seem to be like their own kind of like thing, which led to a lot of openings for pop punk and made it like much more quote unquote mainstream. But it's definitely not. I mean, yes, I know it, like categorically they are pop punk, but they never crossed my mind for that for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know why.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially, we're gonna obviously get into Neighborhoods, but even like on Untitled, like that to me, there's like very little. There's like maybe 2 songs that I would categorize as pop punk.
Yeah.
So I would say like probably Enema of the State and like probably the Take Off Your Banjo Jacket. Those are like standard pop punk, but like some of their most popular songs, like you talked about, I Miss You, that's not even close to a pop punk song.
No, I mean, it's interesting. It's more in the sense of like the emo music, right? And so it's like, and emo was really, as a quote unquote genre, was really making its way in the mid 2000s, right? I mean, early 2000s for sure, but I mean, that's really, 2005 onward. That's when you had bands that were really doing that whole emo thing, and I think Blink-182 kind of capitalized on that as well.
That's actually, I wanted to ask you about that, because I did a little bit of research on it and talked about it very briefly, but like, pop punk versus emo, because I know there's like a whole lot of overlap, but like what separates emo from pop punk?
That's a really good question. I don't know if they're entirely separate genres. Some people would probably argue that emo is like a subgenre of pop punk. And I think I don't know if I'd agree with it. And what I mean by that is I genuinely don't know if I would agree with it. But I could definitely see how that's a valid thing. But to me, pop punk is probably more... The elements of pop punk are probably more in the actual music of it, like the instrumentation and the style choices. Whereas I feel like emo is more of the lyrical content and like aesthetic. And that's why I think the idea of like emo being a subgenre of pop punk makes sense. Because it's like, well, they're not really categorized by the same criterion. So you could technically do both. But yeah, I don't really know. I mean, look, because you have emo trap music, right? That's happening today.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I'm not going to check that out.
Yeah. I mean,
that doesn't...
I mean, yeah, listen to every like rapper today, man. Like, I mean, pretty much everybody has like that emo pop punk vibe to them.
That's true.
And you can thank like, Machine Gun Kelly through actually probably Travis Barker with that, kind of having that resurgence.
Well, that has to do, I think, a lot with the stylistic change that Blink-182 went through in the early 2000s. Was Travis was just like listening and performing a lot of hip hop.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. He was, I mean, and didn't they did a tour with like Lil Wayne at one point and stuff, and so like they've always had like their connections into like the rap world in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form.
Well, one thing I talk about this is that like Travis Barker, I don't really think was ever a punk drummer. Well, I guess because he got his start. Well, I don't know if he got his start, but like his first major project was the Aquabats. Have you heard of them before?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was like they were on tour at one point with Blink, and like he had to fill in
Yeah,
for them.
yeah, because he filled in for Scott Rayner.
Yeah.
That's the original.
The
drummer,
story
right?
is that he filled in and he like learned all the songs in
Yeah.
like 45 minutes, or I don't remember what it was, or he learned 45 songs in some short amount of time. I don't know, but he was crazy that he did that. But I didn't know anything by the Aquabats at all.
Well, I hadn't heard of them, and I didn't even know that Travis Barker was in until later. But I saw Real Big Fish in 2011, which was an awesome show.
Yeah, they're fantastic.
You've seen? Oh yeah, because they were at
They were at the Warped Tour.
Yeah. In 2008, right?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't remember
So
exactly.
remember, yeah. But yeah. Anyway, so and the Aquabats opened for them, and I caught the set list.
Really?
Yeah, I caught the set list, but I didn't really like care about the band, so I just like I gave it to. There was like I can't remember who, but there was like a girl next to me who was just like really into it, and I gave it to her. But yeah, it wasn't like their music wasn't great, but the showmanship and like the onstage antics were great because they were all dressed up like superheroes and.
God, I love Warped Tour. I miss Warped Tour so much. It's
Is it done? Is Warped Tour done?
Yeah, they had the last Warped Tour like what was it, 3-4 years ago now? I think it was like 2019 was the last one, and it wasn't even like the full tour. It was 3 shows. They had a West Coast show, a Midwest one, and then they had a East Coast. And I went to the one on the East Coast, which was in Atlantic City on the beach, and it was like a 2.5-day event, I think. And, you know, I saw like, I almost said 1985, Bowling for Soup. I saw Blink-182 there with Matt Skiba, though. And, you know, tons of bands were there. It was an amazing thing. But Warped Tour, to me, is by far the best set of shows I've ever been to. Best tour, best music festival, whatever you want to call it.
Do you think that, like, it could be... Because when you were explaining the most recent Warped Tour, it reminded me of Lollapalooza. Because, like, Lollapalooza used to be the tour, and now it's just, like, you know, they'll have, like, a couple shows. Do you think that like Warped Tour could come back in like that, like as just like this big festival that people come to?
Well, now there's something called like Sad Summer Festival, which is happening yearly, which is done by Journeys instead of Vans, right? And they have been getting a lot more traction, it's been getting bigger and bigger. But they're more in like the kind of more newer pop punk stuff. You know, you're looking at like, and by newer, you might some of these bands seem older, but like All Time Low, Mayday Parade, The Main. Even more people like Stand Atlantic, like some of these other bands that are probably more modern in the pop punk scene. It's not really like a lot of the classic ska people or even the hardcore bands. Like there was like post-hardcore bands like Pierce the Veil and stuff you would occasionally see at Warped Tour and things like that. So, and Falling in Reverse and Escape the Fate, which you won't probably see at something like Sad Summerfest. But for Vans Warped Tour, from what I can tell, they're not doing anything anytime soon.
Yeah.
The guy it was the longest running tour in U.S. American history. It had been going, like, longest continuous, biggest tour. And it was, I think he was just tired. I forgot the guy's name, but he was just like, I can't keep setting this up every year. This is a lot. So it's funny, though, because when it stopped, it was like the next year Machine Gun Kelly's album came out, I'm pretty sure. And it was just like, everybody loves pop punk now.
Yeah.
And it's just like, great. That would have been fantastic if they didn't cancel all their deals.
Yeah, but you probably would have gotten a lot of people there that are like not, you know, true pop punk fans. Like they're like a lot of the artists that you'd probably see at Warped Tour wouldn't appeal to them. Like they would just be looking for a couple artists here and there. And it would maybe like affect the like environment of the festival.
I don't know. Like I think it's weird. Pop punk shows have some of the best and worst people at them, so I don't think it would affect it. But I did love Warped Tour for one thing, is that it was open pretty much to all ages. It wasn't like, you know, Bonnaroo or things like that, or like these big EDM festivals where it's like, oh, we don't care about the music, we're just going to get fucked up. And I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. But at Warped Tour, to me, it felt way more about the music. Because it was like, yeah, you'd see all ages there all the time. And you could still drink, and, you know, people were still smoking weed or whatever they were doing. I didn't. I'm a straight edge. I don't do drugs. You hear that? FBI? I'm a clean man.
So you mentioned Matt Skiba, and I'm going to ask you about him in a second, but kind of our bridge to that. Did you listen to any of the post-hiatus projects that the different band members did, like Angels and Airwaves? I know is the big one, plus 44 as well.
I didn't listen to the 44 one. I did listen to Angels and Airwaves a lot because one of my best friends, Chase Anderson, who also has a podcast, go check him out at the Lucky Duck Podcast on Spotify. I had to put that plug in real quick. But he was the guitar player and singer in my first band. And he was the person who probably got me most into Blink-182. And he was a big Angels and Airwaves fan. And so because of that, I started to listen to Angels and Airwaves a good amount. I did not like them any more than I liked Blink-182 when they first came out because they sounded exactly the same. I'm not going to lie. Like, they sounded very similar to me. They had different lyrical contexts, and obviously it was a little bit more serious of a project for Tom. But in terms of, like, musicality and, like, differences in, like, aesthetics in that sense, the melodies were very similar. The harmonies were very similar. So I didn't really like them any more or less. I just liked them the same. And I was like, well, I'm just going to listen to Blink-182.
Yeah.
But their newer stuff, and by newer, I think the last thing that came out was like 2020. But he had a song come out in 2019 called Rebel Girl. That one was really good. I really liked that one. There was another one that came out in 2020. I can't remember what it was called, but it was very, very good. So if you're curious about Angels and Airwaves, go check out their more recent stuff. That's definitely something where I think Tom started to find his sound. He was never a guy, you've seen him play guitar, he's never literally been a virtuoso in guitar, but he makes it up for in like his experimentation with sounds and sound design and effects. And he really gets into like the space rocky kind of ethereal sounds in Angels and Airwaves. While still, it's very fun because it's like maintaining the same melodic structures of a lot of things that are happening in Blink-182 songs, but over this dreamscape of music. And it's just gotten better and better over the years of him finding that kind of niche for himself.
Yeah, I've also noticed, I feel like the timbre of his voice has changed.
It 1000% has. I mean, go listen to literally Dude Ranch and then go listen to like one of those recent Angels and Airwaves songs. It's like deeper, it's clearer. I really don't know what to call it, but it's still the nasally, like, you know, it's Tom DeLonge, but you have this feeling of like he's cloned and replaced like Avril Lavigne. So I don't know.
It sounds less obnoxious.
Yeah, it's probably like after he got abducted or something. You know, the probe just kind of like hit his vocal cords a little too hard. That's a whole other topic.
So it's good that we're talking about Tom. So now we can transition to, you know, his brief replacement. What was like a 5 or 6 year replacement, Matt Skiba. What did you think of the Matt Skiba era?
I didn't listen to, was it Alkaline Trio very much. I listened to like, it's funny, I listened to 2 songs by them at an FYE one time. And I don't remember like disliking them.
Yeah.
But I cannot tell you anything about them. But I saw him live twice. Once in Tallahassee and then once at that Warped Tour in Atlantic City. It was great. It was an awesome show. He's got great stage presence. He seems like a fun guy. They got the band up and running, doing a lot of the same songs. He picked up a lot of the stuff that Tom did. Not to the same, like, nostalgic feel of it. And, like, Tom being on stage is different than, you know, Matt. But regardless, I think the albums that came out under him, like, while he was around, were great, honestly. And I think he did a fantastic job, and I have nothing negative to say about Matt Skiba.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I think a lot of times when you have like core members that are replaced, like I know, as you know, I'm a big Chili Pepper fan, and you know, I had the episode about One Hot Minute, and you know, the guitarist that replaced Frusciante, you know, didn't hold a candle to him. And whereas I think Matt Skiba, you know, obviously you can't replace Tom just because of, you know, the personality that he brings, and the uniqueness that he brings. But I think Matt Skiba really did kind of create Blink-182 as a new band, but it still retained a lot of the qualities that endeared fans to them. So I think I really enjoyed the Matt Skiba era, and we've talked about the album 9, which was 9, right?
Yeah, 9. Yeah.
Yeah, it came out in 2019, and in California, I love that album. Like when it came out, I was like super impressed.
I fucking hated California. I maybe hated is too strong, but I really did not like it as much as 9. I thought 9 was fantastic. I thought California had like 3 good songs on it, and I just couldn't get. I'm not that I couldn't get through it. It's just like it just wasn't my thing. But 9, I would agree with you, it was fantastic. I think we listened to it on the plane when we were going to a wedding.
Well, what's that? Was it Pin the Grenade? That's the song.
Pin the Grenade. Oh,
man, I could listen to that all day. That's a great song.
1000% my favorite song off of that album for sure.
Yeah. What's the? I really wish I hated you.
Yeah,
that's a great one. And let's even including Mr. Skiba. Do you have a favorite member of the band?
You know what? I have to say Tom DeLonge for his vocals, because one of the things that I really liked about pop punk is the melodies that they incorporate, right? These kind of like maybe overly simplistic. I don't know if that's offensive, but like these really, really catchy melodies. And Tom always had the best melodic singing parts. It was like always the catchy things, always the things I wanted to sing. And it really influenced a lot of my own writing. Like a lot of the riffs I write, a lot of the vocal melodies I write kind of do that same like 2-3-1, 2-3-1 thing that he does. And I think that he's probably my favorite for that. As like a person, as an image, as someone who does a lot of cool shit, probably, why am I blanking right now? Well, I would still say Tom, but Mark has done so much more projects with other people. Mm-hmm. Like he's done stuff with like Neck Deep, which is an amazing pop punk band. He's done his own projects with what is it? Alex, I don't know how to pronounce his name. The lead singer from All Time Low. They have their new thing called like, was it Strange Creatures? That's the other project he's been doing. So in terms of just like getting his hands in a bunch of other stuff, Mark has done a lot for pop punk in the modern day. Whereas Tom is just more fun to listen to, in my opinion.
You know, I was thinking a lot about this, and you would probably think, oh, Travis would be my favorite because he's such an incredible drummer, and I play drums. But I don't know why, but Mark has got to be my favorite. And I just think there's just like some kind of like there's a sense of normalcy to him. Mm. Like there's nothing like, you know, and I love Tom, and I don't even mean this in an insulting way, but sometimes like his lyrics, the quality of it, or not the lyric, well the lyrics too, but his voice can sound a little gimmicky. With like,
yeah, I love that though.
which again, I'm not even saying as an insult. But whereas Mark is just, he sounds like you could put him in any band and he could probably fit in. And some of this probably my favorite Blink-182 songs, usually the vocals are provided, the lead vocals are provided by Mark, and I would think that means that he writes those songs, and I don't really know that for a fact. But just the songs that he's on lead vocals, I tend to prefer.
Yeah, I would see that. From you particularly, I think that makes sense. It's always funny because Mark does kind of seem like the dad of the group. Yeah. He definitely seems like the most put together. And it was really sad when he announced that he had cancer, but he's cancer free now, which is great. Yeah. So that's fantastic. But it just seeing him throughout the years and like kind of like just being normal and just being like, but also being not normal because he's next to these insane people all the time. It's pretty wild. But his stuff is great, and like I said, the music that he writes, his writing is fantastic. Yeah,
that's one thing. When I was doing this episode, like the whole crux of this episode, and when it comes out, you'll hear it. Is Adam's song.
Yes,
and
I love Adam's song.
That is an amazing song, and the songwriting in that song is so unbelievable on so many levels.
I feel like, and I love that song, but I think there's a song that I always think of when I think of Adam's song too, in terms of like emotional, on the same emotional like hierarchy, because it's like you think of like I want to fuck a dog in the fucking ass song, and it's like, okay, well that's probably the lowest in terms of like seriousness, but like in terms of serious songs, Adam's song is up there, but the other one is Stay Together for the Kids.
Right.
And those are probably my two favorite songs where I'm like, oh, this band isn't just shit and piss jokes all the time. Yeah. I think, wasn't their first tour called the Pee Pee Poo Poo Tour?
No. It's like, that was like the name of their LLC or something like that.
I don't remember. Either way. But it's like, it's the duality of these people that's what really attracts me to pop punk, by the way, is like this idea of like, hey, life sucks and we get it, and I'm gonna complain about it, but also pee pee poo poo pee pee. Like it's funny. It's a joke. Life is a joke sometimes, And I love that duality, and it really kind of grounds me in a lot of ways. So when they write music like that, improve to me, oh, you get it. Like you're understanding.
Well, yeah, I think like on Enema of the Enema of the State, which is the album that features Adam's song, I think the song that precedes it is Dysentery Gary.
Oh yeah.
With
it's the interludes they have and all that stuff. It's like it's so funny. You'll go from talking about like suicide to immediately being like, I'm gonna literally fuck this dog again. And then you go back into like, my girlfriend sucks. And it's like, okay, dude, pick a lane. But that's something that's interesting about older pop punk too, is like they talked a lot about they talked a little bit about different things. I feel like a lot of pop punk I listen to these days is very good, very, very good. But I feel like the range of content or things that they talk about or sing about is a lot more relationship focused. It's a lot more of like, not even current events. It's just kind of mostly like, honestly, relationships, and then relationships with yourself. There hasn't been a lot of like talking about situations like dealing with divorce or dealing with a friend's suicide or things like that. You get those, but I feel like those things, or even like the establishment talking about, like, because that's what punk really is, right? So if you're gonna have pop punk, it's just poppy melodies over still saying fuck the government. You're not getting a lot of that these days, but Blink-182 definitely had that with their kind of laissez-faire attitude about shit, and just being they remind me very much of like the Trey Parker and Matt Stones of the world, of just like Trey Parker and Matt Stone with South Park. What South Park is to TV is what Blink-182 is to music, in my opinion. It's like, we're going to make jokes, we're going to have fun, but we're going to also subtly and surprisingly tell you things that make you sad or upset, and comment on it. So it's like, it's satirical in a way, but you could also like relate them back to like Futurama too, where it's like Futurama is like mostly jokes all the time, and then they have an episode about a dead dog instead of fucking it. And then it makes you cry. You're like, how am I crying? So it's like, that's kind of what Blink-182 is too. It's like, you're laughing, and then before you know it, you're crying. And that's a really good artist, in my opinion. If you can invoke that emotional spectrum from a listener, you've done your job as an artist.
No, completely agree. And that's a great way to end that segment, because I want to talk about neighborhoods, which is the subject of this episode. And before I ask you specifics about neighborhoods, I just want to get your opinion. Like, obviously this is a forgotten albums episode, but how would you define a forgotten album?
I think a forgotten album isn't really all that complex. I'm not going to have some groundbreaking definition for it. But it's definitely one that doesn't just do well commercially. But I think it is contextual to understand what's going on during that time. It was a 2011 album, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's like, what was happening in 2011? It's like, oh, I was graduating high school, so I can have some remembrance of like, oh yeah, like LMFAO was really popular. Yeah. And so it's like party rock music, right? Like that was really where it was at. Mm-hmm. And so like there was this kind of, not death to the pop punk, but that was like the starting of it in a way, right? Because things like Paramore were falling off. People weren't listening necessarily to Fall Out Boy anymore. Yeah. These things were going away, and it became almost uncool to listen to it. So was it a commercial failing? Yes, in relative to like its previous albums by Blink-182. But I think it was just a cultural shift away from things. So, and what defines an album is truly probably just cultural and commercial failure, right? But it's not always the album's fault, is what I'm saying.
Right.
From that.
Yeah. So, but would you agree with the definition that you were given? I know you were saying that Neighborhoods wasn't as like commercially successful as their predecessors, but what you consider a forgotten album, would you label Neighborhoods with that?
Yeah, I would say that if you're a cursory Blink-182 fan, you're gonna know Take Off Your Pants and Jacket. You're gonna know Enema of the State. You're gonna know Entitled. You might know Dude Ranch.
Dude Ranch, yeah.
You would be wild to remember Neighborhoods. Yeah. Or even like the EP that came out preceding that, which was like Dogs Eating Dogs, I think. Yeah. And see, I know some stuff. I'm not a complete nobody. And so it's like that was such an exciting time for me because I was like, oh, fuck yeah, new Blink-182. But I was like, this isn't Blink-182. I was like, this isn't... What Neighborhood sounds like is like what they kind of did with Nine almost. It's like, it's weird. If you go listen to it,
that's a really good comparison.
It's
I really like that.
It was too ahead of its time for themselves. It's like they were like, I want to be the mature version of myself now. And it's like, too early. Like, we're still listening to LMFAO, all right? So, cool it down. But no, I agree that it is forgotten. A lot of people don't remember it.
I honestly, the first time that I listened to it was... when I was preparing for this episode, because when I had the idea of talking about forgotten albums, there were like a few albums that I thought of right off the top of my head, and obviously One Hot Minute was one that we had the episode on, and like the second one that came to my mind was Neighborhoods, because I had forgot about it. Like, I remember when it came out because they were doing a tour and I wanted to go and I didn't get the opportunity to, but I just remember like when it came out and thinking, oh, this is going to be a huge hit, and then I never heard about it again. But when I listened to it, I was expecting it to be terrible. I was like, well, people didn't really like gravitate towards it when it came out. It's probably because it's not a good album. And then I listened through and I'm like, this is really good.
Yeah, it's really good. I listened to it kind of in preparation for this, like in the last few days. I kind of gave it a few listens. I love it, honestly. Like, Ghost on the Dance with a title track to that is like, it's amazing. It's so good. And I remember when I first heard that album, I was like, that was the song that I was like really excited about to listen to the rest of the album. But then the rest of the album happened and it didn't invoke the same response that Take Off Your Pants and Jacket did, because it didn't have the same exact like melodic hits for me. That's where it was. And it was this it was like this timing of like where Mark's starting to try some new things, and Angels and Airwaves influences from Tom are really affecting the soundscape of it. And I was like, oh well, this is different. This doesn't sound that pop punky thing. And so I went off to start getting that from other places like Mayday Parade and Go Radio and All Time Low and The Main, because they were feeding me the same stuff I wanted. Whereas Blink-182 was like, I'm going to try something different. You might not like it, but your kids are going to love it, kind of thing.
Yeah. But when it came out, you listened to it, or?
I listened to it, yeah. I mean, but I wouldn't say that. If you were to ask me like 3 weeks ago, like, hey, do you remember any songs off of Neighborhoods? I would have been like, no. Yeah. Like, I just remember the album existing, but I don't really, nothing sticks out to me. So I did listen through it, but it wasn't like something that stuck with me.
Yeah. Do you have, like, I know you mentioned Ghost on the Dance Floor, which I think is such an awesome song. And I think that, putting it into context with DJ Adam, we haven't talked about that, but I think the Plane Crash is like a huge influence on Neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean,
and I didn't really know. Like, I remember when the plane crash happened, but I didn't really know that much detail about it. And reading about it was really horrific.
Yeah,
I mean, I didn't realize like 65% of his body was in second or third degree
He was in
burns.
so much pain all the time. I mean, I think I was reading some article where he was like, and this is going to get dark, where he was like offering friends $1 million to like help him end his life, and it was just like, thank God he didn't, right? Because I mean, it's like he's so much better off now. He's happy. He's got a great life. Was he just married like Kourtney Kardashian or something?
Yeah.
And so it's like I'm just glad that he didn't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. But because I think Goes on the Dance Floor, it's interesting because a lot of people think that it's a tribute to DJ Adam, who was the other survivor on the plane, but then died of an overdose about a year later. Anyways, what are anyways, but I know you said Ghost on the Dance Floor is one of your favorites. Do you have any other favorite songs on the album, or like least favorite songs on the album?
I don't think I had a least favorite song. I liked Wishing Well, I think was another one that really was like, oh, I like this one, I'll listen to this one again. The way I listen to albums is like, I'll listen through it and then I'll denote the songs that I want to listen to again, and then I just listen to those over and over again until I get sick of them, and then I move on to the second tier of songs until I get the whole album. So it usually takes me a long time before I start to really say, this is truly my favorite song, or this is truly, not. And another thing to mention is, like, I'm not a big lyrical guy most of the time. What really catches me is sound, feeling, aesthetic, rhythm, and particularly melody and vocal melody. If it's something I can sing along to, I will gravitate towards it. The lyrics, though, really help if they're really good too. Like that's what keeps me there. So it's like I kind of get caught by the rhythm and the melody, but I'll stay for the lyrics if they're good. So just for reference on how I'm getting to these conclusions.
Yeah. My favorite on the album, I love Natives.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. That's like, is that the first half of that album?
This is the second song on the album.
That's what it. Okay, yeah. I was like, that's pretty early on.
And
so.
it just comes right out of the gate. It's super intense. Like one of the more upbeat songs on the album. Very aggressive. But then the chorus is just like, Mark sings the chorus and it's like pop punk again.
Yeah.
Well,
that's the thing. It's like Mark always like comes in and it's like mellow. You can compare, like, if you know anything about synthesizers, it's like, I always think of Mark as like a sine wave, real smooth, and no bumps, and then like Tom is just a sawtooth. He's just like real gritty on the ears. And Travis is a square. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's that sawtoothy kind of like nasally thing.
Well, do you remember those memes? And I think it was during Obama's second term. That it would be like, Joe Biden would just be like, out of control, and then Obama would be like, be cool, be cool. I kind of feel like that dynamic is kind of like Mark and Tom.
Yeah, it's like he's always like the mellow of the band, and he brings that. But that's what makes it great, is because if you were doing nasally yelling the whole time, then you're just kind of going back to Dude Ranch in a way.
Yeah.
But having this dichotomy of this relaxing, kind of calm moments with Mark, and then these real tense, intense driving moments with Tom, this kind of stress, relaxation, kind of like expand, release, or contract kind of thing. It's like that is what really is great for me as a listener, because it kind of gives me that dynamic variance.
Absolutely. And of the post-Hiatus era, so it's like 2005 forward, after Untitled, so taking into account 9 and California, do you think Neighborhoods is the most underwhelming?
No, I don't think it is. Cheshire Cat is like by far like their first album sucks.
I mean like in their like after 2005. Like if we're looking at those 3 albums, Neighborhoods, California, 9.
California is the weakest one by far, because that's the one where they're getting back on their feet after a long time. They just started with a new member, and they're kind of like finding stuff. Don't get me wrong, they got a lot of things right on California, but I don't think it would. I think in 20 years from now, we're not going to be talking about Neighborhoods being the forgotten album. We're going to be talking about California being the forgotten album.
Well, the thing about California is you definitely have like Bored. It has like those big hits like Bored to Death and She's Out of Her Mind.
And that's it. That's literally it. By the way,
but those are 2 more hits than Neighborhoods has, because like nobody. I mean, maybe someone knows Up All Night.
True, but like as in like an audiophile or something, you might end up wanting Neighborhoods to be up there. I think. But Neighborhoods really isn't anything that I would say would stand out either, right? Like, if I had to pick, it's a personal choice to be like, I would probably rather listen to Neighborhoods, because one, it seems fresher in my mind, and I'm kind of bored to death of California at this point.
That was good.
Yeah, I know. I've got jokes. I don't know. A lot of people don't know this, but I'm like truly funny, like legally. So yeah.
The last question, and you've touched on this a lot, but why do you think that Neighborhoods did not achieve the accolades and success of the albums of the late 90s and early 2000s?
Oh, yeah, 100% of what I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Cultural shift.
Yeah.
There was just more... It was kind of like, rock music was getting big in like the 80s, like the hair metal rock and things like that, right? But then other genres start to take over, and then you start getting into pop music and boy bands in the 90s. And so, like, there's always going to be room for rock. Rock is never going to completely die or go away. But there's always going to be these ebbs and flows to culture and music. And I just think we were just in one of those periods where rock music wasn't cool.
Yeah.
It wasn't cool to be into rock.
I remember when I was in college, I really stopped listening to rock. Like, maybe a few, like the Chili Peppers and the Foo Fighters. But other than that, it was all, like, folk and hip-hop. That's what I listened to in college.
Yeah. It was like, you like country, maybe?
Yeah.
You like... and I would say like that's in certain areas of the country. Would you want to be like listening to country? But for me, it was like if you listen to anything other than, EDM, dubstep, rap, like party music, like there wasn't a lot of people just listening to music. It was like I listen to music to party. I don't listen to music, and I was be like, what? But it was either harder rock. It was like very niche cultures, like subcultures. It's like it wasn't part of the mainstream. The mainstream was your pop music, your typical radio hits. You know, you had your Katy Perry's, things like that. And the only like instrumentation bands, like bands with real instruments, was like Maroon 5, like Mumford and Sons, things like that.
Is Maroon 5 still playing instruments at that point?
I don't know, dude. But it's like, and I do remember like there was some times in like early college too, like Neon Trees kind of come out, and you're like, oh, cool, like that's kind of like a band. He's got like that interesting kind of like rock star vibe and stuff like that. And so there was definitely breakout hits that were like clawing back to getting rock to be in the forefront. But, you know, it was like, if you weren't listening to the new Drake album that dropped, it's like that was what it was. It's not like, hey, have you listened to the new Blink-182 album? It was like, you're still listening to Blink-182? I still get that today. I'll be like, oh, dude, I listened to Sum 41's new stuff when it came out in like 2018 or whatever. Or Goldfinger. Goldfinger dropped an album. Should have talked about them too. That guy in Goldfinger, forgot his name, produced Nine and California.
Really?
That's why you can go listen to some Goldfinger stuff, and you'll see all of the similarities of the guy's Goldfinger music and like what he was doing on those albums. But bottom line, it's just a cultural shift.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, because I was reading like even the bands, and then you mentioned them, like both of the bands that I mentioned in the episode, that, you know, they retained their popularity to some extent, were Fall Out Boy and Paramore, but I think they retained their popularity by straying away from that pop punk sound. Like, didn't like they go through like shifts in their sound?
Yeah, I mean, Paramore, their most recent album pretty much solidifies their change, right? Their kind of trajectory has gone completely different. But like even things like Ain't It Fun and I forgot that other one, Still Into You. Yeah. Those felt not pop punky, right? They were rock, but they were like this kind of subgenre of pop rock. This is where I told you it's like started getting into kind of like the funky side of things, where it's like it was dance rock. It was like, oh, something I can kind of bop my head to and feel good about. And Fall Out Boy went in a different direction, where they're like, we're just going to go epic and make sure that we can fill college football stadiums. If like you ever went to a college football game in anywhere between 2011 to like 2019, you heard a Fall Out Boy song in one of those stadiums. You probably heard like, I forgot what it was, not Heroes or whatever it is, some other song, but they played those nonstop. And the only other band in that kind of same thing was like Panic at the Disco, and which was really just Brendan Urie, and he made like a few albums that really made it big and got radio stuff recently. But now he's not even doing it anymore. So it's like the cultural shifts are there.
Yeah, because Panic at the Disco's done, right?
Yeah, he's not doing anything anymore.
And Sum 41, they just broke up too.
They just broke up. They're going to finish up their tour, and then they're done. And I saw them live like 2-3 years ago, and they were fantastic. They were really good live. So it's sad to see them go, but it's funny when you talk to people and you're like, yeah, I still listen to Blink-182. I still listen to Sum 41. And they're like, oh, those are still around? You still listen to them? They still play? They still tour? And it's like, that's how I know. It's like, well, we're not there yet. You know, it's like, we're past that. It's like, definitely people know some of the certain bands that are newer. Like, you talk to some people who are into the scene, they're going to know who people like Neck Deep are. They're going to know people who are like State Champs. But if you tell them, you know, you still listen to these bands, then you'd be like, what? Why? But that's a great like barometer for me. It's like, if I can go talk to somebody who I know is not into the scene, and they are like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go see them, or I know I listened to that new album, that's how I know that like there's this kind of resurgence happening. When I went and talked to people and they're like, yeah, I listened to the Machine Gun Kelly albums, they were really good. And it's like, cool, so you do like pop punk music, because that was pretty much just like all Travis Barker on that. Like, he pretty much produced that album. So it's like the want and thing is there, but I do think that there's like this kind of like connotation of like them being old, or like that's middle school music. I don't listen to middle school music anymore.
Yeah, well, we were hanging out after the show, before we met up with y'all at Dark Horse. We were hanging out someplace in Virginia Highland. Anyways, so just for context for listeners, we were hanging out a couple weeks ago, went to like a live band karaoke thing, and before that we were at like just getting dinner or whatever. And I mentioned Blink-182, and there was somebody was dating a friend of ours, sister, and she, you know, I mentioned Blink-182, and she's like, oh, I've never heard of that band, and she's like 21, and I was like, oh my goodness.
Yikes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, see, that's...
Anyway, so that's... No. But anyways, Russell, thank you so much for coming.
No problem.
This was awesome. And, I hope that you can rejoin the podcast in the future.
Yeah, when you start doing the 2000s, I'll be able to talk about even more pop punk bands. So
Fair enough. All right, man. Thank you so much. Take care.
thanks. You too.
Thanks, y'all, for listening, and a special thanks to Russell Ramtahal for being a fantastic guest. Have a great rest of your day, and whatever it brings, hopefully music is involved. Again, I'm Dove Brenner, and this is Hot Cakes from a 90s Stand. Take care.